Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for a new Film Fanatic show. So I hope everyone's doing good. It's 10:33 on a Thursday morning. So yeah, I just uploaded a quick little video on the channel promoting the show coming up on Saturday at Hey Sailor. We're doing another quantum show with a bunch of really cool bands: Mannequin Republic, So Over It, and Isaac Raven. We've played, uh, met a couple of the bands. One of the bands, actually two of the bands, we played with Osmia at a one of the So Over It, which is a really great band from Rhode Island. Really great punk band. We played a festival this summer in Rhode Island and met them there, and they were super cool. I got to hang out with them for a while before. Obviously, when you go to these festivals, sometimes there's like if you're performing at them, there's a lot of like hurrying up and then waiting around. But the thing that was so cool is that there was so many bands at this festival that it was so much cool music. So that it was really cool, and I got to hang out with the lead singer of So Over It. Super cool. So they were really great and really great punk band. So we played with them at this festival with Osmia, and then last year we played a quantum show at Hey Sailor with Isaac Raven, and that was super fun, super cool, really cool. Like a bunch of young kids who were kind of play this loud and garagey rock punk stuff that was really cool, all original stuff. So they're going to be on the bill as well. They're from Maine. And then Mannequin Republic, which is a band that we played, that Osmia played with probably like 2 weeks ago up in Bangor at the Red Rabbit Bazaar, which was a really fun show. So they're going to be on the bill too, and the show's starting at 7 o'clock. I just put up a little video promoting, trying to do a little extra promotion for the show coming up. It starts at 7 o'clock, and it's at Hey Sailor, which is such a fantastic venue. Been really fortunate to play a lot of gigs there, and it's also for a good cause. There's going to be like a little food drive going on too for non-perishable food items for the Belfast Food Bank. So come on by, or Soup Kitchen, I should say, the Soup Kitchen. So yeah, I just uploaded that video, and yeah, come on by. And so today is on a movie that I realized I never did a show on. I've been on this big like Frankenstein kick lately because I saw the new Frankenstein last week, the new Guillermo del Toro film. I saw it in 4K, and it was pretty cool to see it on the big screen. And now I don't think it's kind of strange. I think it was just getting a 2 week theatrical run. It's a Netflix production. They financed the whole movie for Guillermo del Toro, so they part of the deal was that it was going to get a theatrical run for 2 weeks in IMAX and various other theaters, and then it was going to go straight to streaming. So got a chance to see it, which I was glad to see on the big screen. Definitely something. It's not a masterpiece, but some people are saying it's like the greatest movie that he's ever made, and I don't think it's really close to like you know there's moments of brilliance in this movie. I think it's kind of clunky, but it's a little bit silly, a little bit goofy at times. But there are some magical moments in the movie, and you can tell that Guillermo del Toro is put a lot of love into this movie. So I did a review of Frankenstein a few days ago, and I really definitely recommended to get a chance to see it on a big screen, which it's a movie meant to experience in that setting. So, but I'm not sure if it's available anymore. But overall, I liked it, and not on par with his really great films, I don't think. But so anyway, I've been on this Frankenstein kick, and I grew up watching. I might watch the original tonight, Boris Karloff, because I don't know if I've actually done a show on that. I have a DVD copy of the original, and I haven't seen it in years. Don't have it on Blu-ray, but it would be cool to see it again. And I don't think I did a Film Fanatic show on it. But again, I grew up huge Frankenstein fan. The Universal monsters. And the story's the same for millions of other kids growing up. The classic Bela Lugosi Dracula films, Boris Karloff, as Frankenstein, and also playing the Mummy, Lon Chaney Jr., the Wolfman, and then you have like the Invisible Man, and then you have the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Just those things were so integral to my youth growing up. Frankenstein and Dracula meet Abbott and Costello. I was a huge fan of Abbott and Costello. Quentin Tarantino regards that as being like one of his favorite movies of all time, and it is a masterpiece. But so all of those classic Universal monsters are just like just part of my DNA, but then it's part of our culture. So, and I've always been a massive fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula and also Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Those are books that, again, I kind of got exposed to those monster movies, the classic ones, the classic Universal monster movies growing up as a kid, like millions of other people. And I think shortly after, I definitely saw the films first, but shortly after, maybe when I think it was in high school was when I actually read the books. And I realized, wow, there's a lot more to the story. There's a lot more detail and depth to those stories. And so, and I think to this day the greatest adaptations of werewolf like the werewolf or the Wolfman kind of iconic monster for me is, I love the Lon Chaney Jr., but my favorite werewolf film of all time is The Howling. I'm also a massive Paul Naschy fan, massive, and he's done so many wonderful and insane werewolf movies. But I'd say The Howling is just, that movie is just a very satisfying movie, and also An American Werewolf in London, of course. But there's so many great werewolf films, and I think they, for the genre, even though that's not a werewolf movie or a Wolfman movie per se, but I still think it's so close to the original kind of idea. I consider those movies like the definitive version. And then also with Dracula, Nosferatu, I think, for many, many, many years, and I still regard it as kind of the supreme masterpiece. But for me, the best adaptation after have I've read the book Bram Stoker's Dracula many, many times, and I always revisit. I actually just read it again over the winter, and then also shortly before that, I had read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein again. So those are classic books. They're two of my favorite gothic kind of horror books ever. So I do revisit those every year, and so. And I think with Dracula and Nosferatu, I think there are those definitive versions, and there is a definitive version of that character. For years, it's always been Coppola's version, which I still regard so incredibly highly. It's so high on my list. But my definitive version is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I just think that movie is just a complete, just nails all the points, and I think that movie's a total masterpiece. And I think with Frankenstein, it's been like pretty mixed. There's so many Frankenstein movies, and the one I'm going to be talking about today is actually one I have not seen in years, and I was surprised on how just awesome it was, like really good. And so with the Frankenstein monster or the Frankenstein, film adaptations, there are so many. And I've just felt like over the years, there's never been the definitive version like that's on par with those other movies that I've mentioned. I just feel like there's great versions, there's good versions, but nothing that has been at that level. And I still Guillermo del Toro's. I don't know, like it's really good. It's probably the best adaptation as far as the whole of the story and kind of the high concept of it. You know, it's definitely one of the best, if not the best, but I still think it's not as good. I wouldn't say it's I couldn't put it on par with like Robert Eggers' Nosferatu or The Howling. I couldn't do it. But all that being said, my favorite, which I shouldn't forget, but my favorite Universal monster movie and character is the Creature from the Black Lagoon. The original film. There's tons of sequels that are also like really terrible and amazing, but the original Creature from the Black Lagoon, I think that movie is such a masterpiece, and that is my favorite actually out of all of the canon of the Universal monster universe. I love that movie. I got this amazing Blu-ray edition of that movie, and I've covered it and I've talked about it before. There's at least two videos about that film, about that movie, and that character. So today's show is on The Curse of Frankenstein, which is an old school horror film that was produced by Hammer Studios. I got this really great DVD set, and it's pretty good. I definitely need an upgrade of these movies, especially The Curse of Frankenstein, because it was really good. I was really surprised. I hadn't seen it in years, but this is a DVD copy of it's a double horror double feature, and it has The Taste of Blood of Dracula, which is also really awesome, starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And The Curse of Frankenstein is also included in this. And there's not really any special features. It's pretty standard DVD, but pretty cool. I can't remember where I got it. But I realized the other day, like, because I've been on this Frankenstein kick, and I just uploaded another Frankenstein movie, Roger Corman's Frankenstein Unbound, which is really awesome too. Totally different. It's such an original. I think that movie is so good because it's such an original take on the story, even though it very much does align itself with the Mary Shelley story. But it's so kind of left field. It involves like time travel. It's very sci-fi based, but it's awesome. And I hadn't seen that movie in years. So last night I watched The Curse of Frankenstein, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And Hammer Films, the Hammer Studio Films, also, you know, watching Hammer horror films with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing was such a massive part of my life as a kid. Those films were my favorite. They still are, even though I kind of consider them more in the kind of the lower exploitation, low budget realm. But Christopher Lee as Dracula, I mean, just as that, I mean, I think that's kind of the most iconic image of Dracula you can possibly imagine, and that's as good as it really gets. But I grew up watching Hammer horror films, and I just love those movies. I still love them. I've gotten a few. I have most of them on DVD. I need to get some big upgrades of them on Blu-ray, but those movies are masterpieces. And so they also did, they're mostly, Hammer Studios was mostly well known for their Dracula films, and of course the iconic Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. But they also, did other monster movies. And since I've been on this, monster kick, I watched The Curse of Frankenstein last night, and man, it was fantastic. It came out 1957, which is just totally crazy. It was directed by Terence Fisher, who was such an awesome director. He did so many of the Hammer films, and just incredible. He was probably the best director during that time when the Hammer films were coming out. The Hammer films were super huge. They were, kind of a phenomenon, and I think those movies and what Hammer Studios did back then with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing was so iconic, and they just really influenced so many different kinds of horror films and just horror films in general. So, and Terrence Fisher, I think, during that time, in the late 50s to the 60s and 70s, again, dozens of movies. Terrence Fisher was definitely like probably the best director in charge of making those iconic horror films. And I again with the Hammer horror genre, I that was just a an integral part of my youth growing up. Those movies were always on cable, and I used to watch them all the time. And then I would rent them on VHS, and then I think I even bought. I do have a handful of the classic Hammer films on DVD. I have most of the Christopher Lee films, the vampire films, Dracula movies. I have most of those on DVD, but then I also own probably a handful of those on VHS actually, and I don't think I have any on Blu-ray, which is so ridiculous. I think I have one or two, but amazing films. And The Curse of Frankenstein, I hadn't seen it in years, and I watched it last night, and I was like, man, this is really good. This is definitely one of the best, I think, adaptations of this classic story and classic monster. I really do. It's really original, and it's interesting too because Christopher Lee plays Frankenstein's monster, and Peter Cushing plays Dr. Frankenstein. And considering that this movie came out in 1957, this movie is super dark. It's dark as hell. And I think, the portrayal of Dr. Frankenstein is really great in this movie because he is kind of this. In this movie, they really get into how he was, just this kind of psychopath, this murdering psychopath, and grave robber. There's a lot of scenes in it where he's like accumulating body parts and he's like robbing these graves, and then he actually, he decides to murder somebody who is like a scientist that he knows and that he kind of looks up to, and he knows he has this brilliant brain. So he has this plot to kill him and take his brain, and he ends up doing that, and he murders this guy, and it's pretty fucked up. Like, this came out in 1957. I definitely think that this movie is one of the darker portrayals of this classic story. It really is. Because he's like the total psychopath in this movie. And the ending is really great. And it's got a very kind of serious tone, and it's really interesting seeing Christopher Lee play the monster. You know, I always equate him as playing Dracula, and it's really cool seeing him in this context. And he's fantastic. He's fantastic in it. Like everything that Christopher Lee has been in or has been involved in. I mean, the same thing with Peter Cushing. I think those guys were so iconic. Like, they could be in any kind of movie and just be fantastic. There isn't a movie that I can think of that they were in that I did not like or had problems with. Just amazing. I highly recommend The Curse of Frankenstein. Again, I can't believe this came out in 57, and it's a super dark and sinister story. And I like Hammer films typically are, you know, on the cheesier side. But that's part of the charm. They use a lot of the same sets for each film, or they would. They're very gothic. There's Christopher Lee was always at odds with the studio because he always loved the original source material, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he always, in interviews that I've seen, he had always had this struggle with Hammer Studios where he was like, we have this great source material, this is a classic book, why don't we try to stick to kind of the story? And Hammer Studios would always, do something totally different, or, maybe a little bit more silly or goofy but not really stay stay true to the source material at all. They would have all these liberties. And for his whole career, he was always at odds with the studios for doing that, which I always found really interesting. And with Frankenstein, the Curse of Frankenstein, it's pretty. Again, I just saw the new Frankenstein, the and that book or that movie is very much in step with the book. It does take a lot of liberties, and it does do some very different things, but it's really, almost chapter by chapter at times, which I think is good, and then I think it is a little bit, it gets a little bit in the way. But with this story, with the Curse of Frankenstein, it's very much, it does. Um, and the other thing too, tone wise, like a lot of the Hammer films can be kind of silly and goofy, and that's part of the fun. But this film is pretty serious. It's very dramatic, which I was, which I had kind of forgotten about. Like as far as a Hammer film goes, like it's way more serious in tone, and it's way darker than I remembered it being. And it definitely has that whole like it's actually really close to the book in a lot of ways. A lot of the situational things that happen around the characters, around the monster and Frankenstein, and the love interests that are in the story. A lot of those things are actually very close to the book, which I was surprised by. But the emphasis seems to be, which is different than maybe other films that I've seen based on Frankenstein, is the emphasis is on the kind of the more or less the murderous kind of insanity of Dr. Frankenstein. Like it really kind of shows him as being this, real vile person. And I can't really think of other films that kind of portray him as dark of a character, even though he is clearly insane. But and most movies do portray him as that, as this mad scientist, this mad genius. But he kind of loses his mind, and for his own like kind of grotesque, selfish reasons. So, but this film really emphasizes kind of his darkness. So, really great. 1957. I definitely need to get this on Blu-ray. As well as all the glorious Hammer films. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.